Good afternoon. On behalf of Southern Oregon Climate Action Now, welcome to our 2020 interview series with candidates for the Oregon House, Senate, and County Commissioner. My name is Lori Kaplan. I'm a SoCan volunteer, and I'll be your moderator for this interview. As a tax-exempt 501c3 nonprofit organization, SoCan cannot endorse candidates, but we can offer constituents information on where candidates stand on issues related to our mission. The focus of these interviews is therefore limited to questions about climate and the environment. All candidates of the general election have been invited to participate in these interviews. Some have accepted and others have declined. Today we'll be speaking with Representative Pam Marsh, candidate for Oregon House District 5. Thank you, Pam, for joining us for this session.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
Thank you. I'm going to explain the format. We will have 2 minutes for Pam to make an introduction, followed by 9 questions that I will read, and the candidate will have 2 minutes to answer each question, and then 2 minutes for closing remarks. To ensure a fair and balanced interview, all candidates receive the questions 7 days in advance and will be posed exactly the same questions. Also, to ensure fairness, there will be no follow-up questions. Representative Pam Marsh, candidate for Oregon House District 6, welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. SoCan has been a wonderful partner during my experience in the legislature, and I continue to be grateful for your expertise, your energy, and your passion for the issues that we share in common. Just to give you a brief introduction, I represent House District 5 in the Oregon legislature. My district starts at the Klamath County, Jackson County line up in the Green Springs, sweeps down the mountain, includes Ashland, Talent, Phoenix, a little corner of Medford, and then it heads out to include Jacksonville and the Applegate. So it's kind of a meandering district above the California line. I was first elected 4 years ago. I am running for re-election in 2020. Before that, I served 4 years on the Ashland City Council. Before that, I was on the Planning Commission. I have a long history in involvement in the public sector as well as public-private organizations. My family originally moved to Southern Oregon in 1994 to run and to own and operate a business up in the Green Springs. So we've had now 26 wonderful years in Southern Oregon, both in a very rural area and now where I live on the main street of Ashland. So very happy to be here with all of you today.
Thank you so much. And my apologies that I said District 6. You represent District 5.
Well, the numbers are kind of irrelevant to most of us, so.
My notes were not modified, so thank you for making that clear. Okay, on to our questions. The increasing droughts we've been facing have resulted in frequent and substantial water shortages. Please explain what you think state government and agencies should do to address the increasingly difficult problems of water availability and water rights.
Well, there is no question that water for both potable purposes and for irrigation are going to be one of our biggest infrastructure challenges in the years to come. And we might as well get on the table right now a subject that we're going to be talking about extensively during this interview, and that is the climate change that is really pushing our droughts, decreasing rainfall, resulting in minimal snowpacks. Those sources are all the sources that we have traditionally depended on for our public water systems. When we have insufficient rain and snow, we also have difficult, here's my cup of tea coming in. We also are further endanger our water system because those low levels of water make systems much more vulnerable to algae, and to toxins. And we've seen some of that already. And about a year ago, we saw the city of Salem have a terrible problem with its water system. Those kinds of experiences are just going to increase. So we are going to have to invest in our water infrastructure. The governor is working on a long-term plan, as are several different business organizations. In prior sessions, we tried to address this question in a little bit of a piecemeal form, but I supported efforts to invest resources in groundwater mapping and to support a fee on certain water rights. I mean, it is very clear that we are not going to have access for the kinds of water resources that we need unless we are willing to put some money and skin in the game. We need to look at undergrounding irrigation districts. We need to look at understanding much better where our water is flowing from. And one of the unfortunate things about our inability to pass climate legislation over the past couple of sessions has been the fact that the legislation that we talked about at that time would have generated resources to end this work. So we're going to have to find other resources.
Thank you. Oregon's Forest Management Practices Act has not been revised for decades. Do you think it should be revised? And if so, how?
Well, one very good thing has happened in the last year, and thank goodness we've had some positive things to point to, and that is a really groundbreaking agreement between temperate interests and conservation partners around looking at these core issues. The agreement was announced back in February. It was affirmed through legislation that was passed in the special session just a few weeks ago from the day in which we're conducting this interview. And what it does is a few things. First of all, the entities on both sides agreed to not pursue initiatives that were otherwise proposed on the ballot that would have addressed the, on the part of conservation interests, the forest policies. They also agreed to several different actions ahead. First, they agreed to undergo a mediated process to develop what's known as habitat conservation plans for our forests. The development of these can vary, but essentially we are looking at forest practices that will protect wildlife, and that could be a groundbreaking change for us. They also agreed to curtail aerial spraying that's done without notice. And they agreed to greater setbacks in the Siskiyous in forested areas to ensure that our streams are protected when adjacent areas are logged. Tremendous breakthrough. So our job right now, I think, is frankly to support that effort going forward, to make sure that both sides have what they need to conduct that mediation, and to basically take a little bit of a breather while we see if habitat conservation plans can result in some of the fundamental changes that many of us would like to see in our forested areas and in our forest practices.
Thank you very much. Oregon's wildlife management plan has included removal of wolves from the state endangered species list and a proposal to allow bear hunting along the Wild and Scenic Rogue River. Do you think it's important to conserve Oregon's bears, endangered wolves, and other wildlife species at risk? Please explain why and identify where this ranks in your priority list.
I think it's extremely important. Let me tell you a little bit of a story. Way back when OR7 was first on the landscape in Oregon, and some of you remember how we tracked it as it moved about, because it was very exciting as the first introduction of wolves back into our territory. I was living in the Green Springs at that time. And when we knew from all the tracking information that we were receiving that OR7 was in our neighborhood, we held a party because it was pretty exciting to have that wolf as one of our new neighbors. So we had a welcome to the Green Springs party. We made wolf cookies. We showed wolf movies. And we continued to enthusiastically support all efforts to protect the wolves that are now populating Southern Oregon. I have always opposed any efforts to weaken or to establish trophy hunting. Clearly, we need predators to keep nature in balance. Wolves and cougars pose no threat to humans and minimal threat to livestock. We've seen some really wonderful collaborative efforts to help our livestock owners put in fencing and other protective devices to keep wolves from taking livestock at any time. And I think we have to continue to look for innovative solutions, to understand that we all need to work on this together, and very much to oppose any sort of efforts to reinstitute trophy kind of hunting that would undermine the species.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Given that some segments of Oregon's population suffer more extensively than others from adverse climate impacts and toxic pollution, how should we invest in correcting health and other social inequities as part of our response to climate change?
Well, this is a question that is extremely timely right now during this pandemic. During the year of 2020, we've had two giant experiences. One is a pandemic. And in the context of the pandemic, we had the killing of George Floyd, the reemergence of the Black Lives Matter movement, and we've had national introspection really around our recognition that we can no longer ignore that many of our institutions and communities are really beset by a legacy of racial injustice. So now it is time to take that on in a way that's really meaningful. All of the work that we are going to be doing in the legislature over the next year is going to have to look at racial justice as a primary factor. And that includes our environmental work as well. Now, we have always talked in the environmental movement about reaching out to people of color and trying to achieve environmental justice as part of our work. And now we are going to have to make sure that that is really the driving factor in programs that move forward. There are some specific actions that I think we need to take. We have at the state level, we have an environmental justice task force. We need to actually give that body staffing and adequate funding so that they can actually do their jobs. We need to make sure that people of color are positioned in our decision-making processes. When we weigh environmental policies or programs, we need to do that with a very clear understanding of what the impacts are on people of color. And we need to elevate those programs that can have the dual benefit of both addressing racial injustice and of furthering our environmental goals. So really, we're looking at what I hope will be a very robust partnership in pursuing multiple goals together.
Okay, thank you. How do you think the state should promote and invest in clean jobs and a green economy as part of our efforts to reboot the economy following the COVID-19 crisis?
I think that's going to be very challenging. We are looking at a state budget that's been essentially devastated by COVID. We are going through a budget cutting process during this biennium aimed at redressing about $1 billion in lost revenue. Next biennium, it looks even worse. We're looking at $3.5 to $4 billion in revenue that won't be coming into the state. Those are real cuts. We have some options available. We are lucky to have some resources that are available to the state in savings that we put aside for a rainy day, just like this one. No question, this is a rainy day. It's still possible the federal government will backfill our budgets, although they certainly don't seem to be moving in that direction at the moment. So, but it makes all the sense in the world as we look at investing in our communities and ensuring that we have the economic base to support robust development, active business sectors, to really emphasize green energy. This is our opportunity. How that exactly is going to happen right now is a big question, because we are not going to have extra revenue sitting around. I think the best we can hope at this moment is that we'll see the federal government come in and focus on making some infrastructure improvements. And to the extent that we have the opportunity to drive those investments within the state of Oregon, I think we want to move toward investments that both address the problems of the pandemic and that give us a clear economic development path forward. And clearly that's clean energy and good jobs.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Given the consensus among climate scientists that global warming is a reality and human activity is largely responsible, what do you think are Oregon's top 3 or 4 priorities to address the climate crisis?
My 3 priorities would be, first, I think we need to stop developing fossil fuel infrastructure. We know that fossil fuel is bad for us on many different levels, and we are never going to get on top of our climate game if we continue to develop additional fossil fuel entities. So let's get rid of fossil fuel infrastructure right off the top. Secondly, I think we need to move to 100% clean electricity. I think you'll see that proposal come forward in 2021, and I'm very excited about it. And third, I think we need to really validate fuel switching so that we have the opportunity and the incentives to actually move from fossil fuel sources to clean energy sources. Frankly, we've been ambivalent about that in our policies thus far. And now we need to get very clear that gas, as it's currently configured, simply can't be a part of our energy mix moving forward. Renewable gas, I think, is still up for debate. Although there's some mixed feelings about that for sure. But conventional gas, certainly fracked gas, has no part in the energy mix. So those are the three things that I would do first off.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Do you support Governor Brown's Executive Order 2004 establishing an Oregon Climate Action Plan? What elements of the executive order do you think should be strengthened and how?
I absolutely support the executive order, and I was very happy to see it pass. The backstory, of course, is that we had 2 legislative sessions where we were unable to pass clean energy jobs legislation, which would have established a market-based cap on greenhouse gas emissions because of Republican walkouts, 2019 and again in 2020. We refigured the 2019 legislation a little bit to head into 2020 to make it very clear that investments would be made in our rural communities. Still, we were unable to get our Republican colleagues to stay in their seats. As a result of our failures, and they are absolutely failures, the governor, just a few days after the tumultuous end of the short session and before the beginning of the pandemic, passed her executive order on climate. And it was impressively far-reaching given the limitations of her office. I think our challenge coming up is going to be to make sure that the resources are in place for the Oregon agencies that are now tasked with carrying out that executive order are going to need in order to do that work. And that's a budget challenge and a policy challenge. In 2021, again, as I said earlier, we're looking at huge budget cuts. The legislature just needs to make sure that we do not allow those budget cuts to come from the individuals, the workforce, the programs that are carrying out the executive order. So I think frankly, that's the number one challenge right in front of us. Mm-hmm. But I'm very supportive of the executive order.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Fire ecologists argue that climate change is the single greatest contributor to wildfires. What do you think should be done in the short and long term to address the problem of fire and smoke bedeviling Southern Oregon?
Boy, that is a big question. And aren't we lucky that so far we've had a pretty good summer? I hope that's still the case when people watch this video. Yeah. I've been deeply involved in this issue really since September 2018, when you will remember we had a summer here in Southern Oregon that was really 6 weeks of choking smoke. Understanding that we needed to bring people together to start looking at what the solutions to this might be and how we could come together as a community, I held a Smoke and Fire Summit in September of that year, and we had 400 very unhappy people show up to come together around this topic. We had a series of panelists who looked at forest restoration. We had another that looked at economic resilience, health impacts, and certainly we wound the whole day up with climate change, because we know while there are multiple factors driving smoke and wildfire, that absolutely climate change is an exacerbating factor in that. Later on, I served on the Governor's Council on Wildfire Response, which met over the past year with the goal of putting together a wildfire plan, including forest resilience, and presenting those recommendations in the 2020 session. I was particularly pleased that that Wildfire Council took the same kind of expansive approach that we did when we first sat down to talk about this in September 2018, recognizing that we have to address what's going on in our forests, what the economic impacts are, what this is doing to all of us as we try to breathe and live healthy lives, and to a lesser degree, climate change within the Wildfire Council, although it was certainly still addressed. Unfortunately, because we had a tumultuous end to the 2020 session, we did not have the opportunity to advance those recommendations. Clearly, they need to involve helping people to keep their own property safe, looking at what we need to do to thin our forests, to keep them more resilient. There's a whole science around that, which I support. And so we're going to have to look at future opportunities to do this because we got cut off in 2020.
Right. Okay, final question. Methane is a greenhouse gas 86 times more potent than carbon dioxide. Given the inevitable emissions of methane that would result from the proposed Pembina-Jordan Cove LNG export facility and pipeline, please explain where you stand on the project and why you reached that conclusion.
So Jordan Cove is a project many people in Southern Oregon have been fighting in one form or another for more than 10 years. We have landowners who are unable to make decisions about their own property because they continue to have the threat of Jordan Cove hanging over their heads. And what we have in Jordan Cove is a Canadian company that is proposing to import through the United States a Canadian-derived product using land forcibly taken essentially by Oregonians through a facility to be developed on our coast and to be exported to countries not yet identified. So it's a foreign company, a foreign product, exploiting basically the resources that we have in Oregon to serve countries someplace else. What about this is a good idea? I have opposed Jordan Cove for many years. I am very clear that there are multiple problems with the Jordan Cove proposal. I've been proud to stand up with Southern Oregonians over and over and over again to oppose the project. We are taking that case to the state level. I think the good news is that the Jordan Cove project requires a number of state permits. We have state agencies that are doing a very good job of very thoroughly analyzing those permits. And so far, frankly, they haven't passed muster. I expect our Oregon agencies to continue to stand up. I think our Attorney General and our Governor are very firm in their commitment to not allow this project to be rammed through Oregon without the proper oversight. And I'm proud of them for doing so. So we will continue to oppose Jordan Cove on every front we can.
Thank you. Now you have 2 minutes to make final closing statements.
Thank you. Well, first of all, let me again thank Alan and Kathy and everyone who's been involved in SOCAN all of these years and who continues to help those of us in Southern Oregon understand the implications of climate change, to look for productive solutions, and to identify investments that we can make in our own communities to try to ameliorate the impact of climate change that we're already seeing on the ground. I think for sure, when you live in a rural community like we do, climate change means something because we see it happening in front of our own faces, and we have for some period of time. I lived in a very rural part of our community for 10 years, and for much of that time, the weather patterns were very predictable. We knew exactly what the weather would be on June 15th. We knew when the storms would come in. We knew when to expect snow. And that was important because we're a tourism-based business. We needed to be able to predict those things. At some point, all the markers started to change. The snowpack isn't what it was before. Our patterns of rain and consistent drought are on the ground. We talked about those earlier. We've seen tumultuous storms that come in and take out healthy 24-inch trees overnight. And we've seen these wildfires, which have significantly changed our communities, damaged our health, hurt our bottom line. The fact is, the climate change is costing us money right now out of our own pocketbooks. Investments in addressing both the need for adaptation and the need for mediating climate change itself are only cost effective. And they are the investments that we need to make for the long term for coming generations. So I stand with SOCAN and all of you in taking on this work. It will continue to be among my very highest priorities in the Oregon legislature.
Thank you so much, Pam, for joining us, and to all of our viewers, and to Carmen Profit for driving the technology that made this possible. This concludes our interview with Representative Pam Marsh, candidate for Oregon House District 5. Thank you, Pam.
Thank you.